everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ruby for All. Julie, what is up?
Hey, I started picking up some drawing again. And Are you familiar with MC Escher?
Is that an artist or an art style?
Yes, it's an artist who draws a lot of impossible type things where you like stairs that look like they continuously go up.
The really famous stairs that like are upside down and there's no end.
Yes, that one. Yep. And I also started playing a game that's seemingly like it's inspired by MC Escher's work. It's called Monument Valley. I think it's pretty popular.
I've heard of that.
Okay. I love that game. And some of my kids love that game too. Anyway, I just started with getting isometric graph paper and drawing really small, simple, impossible structures. Like the famous ones are like the triangle that I realize that this is hard to explain on a podcast, but if you look up impossible triangle, you could... Yeah.
If you know, you know.
Yeah. I've been having fun with that. How are you?
I am not slept as well as I should have last night. I am very on tilt because of the way Discord roles work. Long story, we'll tell later, but just a nightmare. I'm just thinking about authorization and role-based stuff. And I'm just like, there's a lot of ways to do it. And I know the way Discord did it is wrong. Anyway, moving on. I'm good. I'm in it, dude. I've started a new project and I'm championing it and we're already in the weeds. I was pairing with my project partner for a few hours before this and things were getting frustrating.
Uh-oh.
But we move on. I tried to remind myself and I reminded him at the end of it. I was like, look, dude, you and I are like about to punch a hole through both of our monitors and like connect on the inside of the internet. But we actually got a lot done if you think about it. We did really good here. So I'm trying to remember that. I learned about a new Git command today called git instaweb, which is really cool. Didn't know that was a thing. If you pass --httpd equals webbrick, that's probably what most of y'all want because otherwise you have to install a thingy to do that. But git instaweb --httpd equals webbrick. Try it out. I don't know what it is. I just found it. It looks cool.
Thank you.
And we have a guest today. And before we introduce him, we were talking in the pre-show and he was mentioning that getting feedback for talks. And I had this thing that I remembered that I had wanted to share on here, but I had forgotten about, which was I was watching a conference talk the other day and it was recorded. It was a virtual one. And what the author did is he put a link at the very beginning of the talk. He put a link to a Google Doc on all his slides and encouraged them at the beginning and the end to leave questions and feedback. And I thought it was really smart to include a link to it on every slide and at the beginning and the end, and to encourage them to just dump anything that was on their mind. Because a lot of times we ask for feedback at the end of things, and people like me who think of things in very much real time, and then that real time is just over and that thought is just gone and lost to the ether. I thought it was a really great way to ensure you're getting like a more of a flow of feedback. Whereas you might not get as good of a feedback from me at the end as you would like during, where I'm going to be like, oh, that's weird. Why did she say that? What's this? Anyway, that's my pro tip, I guess, for now on what I will be doing when I'm getting feedback or when I'm doing talks like this, is to have something like that so that you can answer questions in real time and you can answer questions afterwards for people who may not get to talk to you.
I think that's a great idea. I've given talks at mini talks at my work, and I think to get feedback, sending out a doc ahead of time, not just after to get feedback, asking specific questions, but having it right there. You can write down how you felt or this confused me, like just on the spot. Whereas at the end of the talk, a lot of things get forgotten. Like some of the maybe not quite as bothersome things get forgotten, and it would have been good for the speaker to know about. Anyway, I want to welcome our guest on the show, Andrew Atkinson. Andrew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Two Andrews again. Yeah. I'm glad to be back. I joined you all one time earlier, quite a while back. We were discussing, I think it was like a year and a half ago. So I'm excited to be back and talk about some of the things that we talked about then as well with updates. And yeah, excited to be here.
We last had you on January 19th, 2023. That was episode 26, I believe. It feels like that was not as long ago as it actually was. What's kind of been up? Catch us up on what's been going on and what's up with the book.
Yeah, a lot has happened since then. I know that, I think on that Ruby for All episode, It was early anyways when I was talking about just writing a book at all, I believe. And I think at that time I would have been maybe just done with the first draft of the book and thinking that meant that I was pretty far along when in fact there was like a load of work to do after that. But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is that the book has been completely finished. Now it's with the publisher. And so the book is High Performance Postgres for Rails. And it's been selling well in the beta form since last fall. And we've been, since last fall, filling out a little bit of additional content and then a lot of editing for readability and fixing errors and getting feedback from early readers and that kind of thing. And it's going to be coming up here in print pretty soon, which is exciting. And then the other big change for me career-wise has been getting into independent consulting on related topics to the book. So back in January, I started with offering up consulting for teams that are, running Postgres and Rails and likely running into some challenges with query performance or growth of their data and managing that well, or really any sort of challenge operating their databases. Maybe they just want to improve the skills on the team. So I've been able to work with a number of teams now since January and do that. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, I'm aware of that because I don't think this is a secret that you came and we had a good discussion at Podia, and I left you several DMs about questions and follow-up after that because that was in my database era, and then I had to move to a React era. Mm-hmm. But I would like to go back to that.
Yeah, Jamie at Podia even provided a testimonial, which I really appreciate. That's on my page. So definitely not a secret. Jamie was happy with how things went. I was happy with it. I thought it was cool. It was neat to be able to meet with the Podia team and bring in some specialized information with query planning and index design and things like that. Hopefully helped the team as they moved forward, applying those things to new work.
It was really interesting. And I have read part of the book. I have a lot of highlights sitting in Obsidian that I need to process just on the beginning of it, but I've been learning a lot. So if anyone's interested, I would highly recommend. We're going to get into, I'm sure, a little bit more, but I just wanted to say that out of the gate. Go ahead and just pick it up because I've been learning a ton, and I have mostly lived with Active Record and mostly not had to deal with databases, mostly. So I've been really enjoying getting a better understanding of things.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, you sent over a really nice recommendation for the book, which I really appreciate. And I featured it prominently on my book page on my website. And yeah, thanks for doing that, Andrew.
Yeah.
And not to leave Julie out. Julie's been really encouraging for me to help dial in educational content and stuff. And I've been doing more of that, mostly by trying to pitch at conferences, to do talks and that kind of thing to help raise more awareness about the book. And then now about consulting as well. So I'm kind of hired both to provide educational material, but also perform work too. But I'm more in my educational era right now.
What's that transition been like from developer to kind of content creator, I guess?
Kind of, yeah.
What's been the most interesting part and the biggest challenge?
Yeah, it's been a little challenging to know, do I want to keep expanding on the content creation side? Because everything has a trade-off, as far as how I spend my time and energy. I could explore creating courses, for example, that might set me up for some more passive income, and it would be fun for sure. And I would learn things myself. And I think I could provide some courses. I'd look to see whether I could differentiate them from existing material and whatnot. But then that might come at the trade-off of I'm exploring myself a bit, whether or not I want to try to get into Postgres development itself. So I started to read some of the mailing list activity, and I have made a couple small contributions to the documentation for Postgres that have been committed, which is fun. And commonly folks will, if they start to go down that path, they might look at one particular subsystem within Postgres and start proposals around changes that could help with Postgres users, but you're very much in the weeds, writing C code and digging through existing code and that kind of thing, which would be quite different for me. So I'm kind of at a juncture now where I'm thinking about that. But then as far as how I can be valuable to teams and companies and be hired, that's going to be doing work, working with them to either do work on their behalf or with their team to optimize queries, tune parameters, do different things related to the database. And that stuff's all kind of swirling around in my head right now.
I'm curious how you're able to kind of juggle everything. You're doing a lot of traveling, going to conferences, giving talks. You're finishing up writing this book, and you do very high quality work. So it's not like you slap something together and put it out. So I'm kind of curious how you're able to kind of balance your life. You have a family.
Yeah, we got 2 kids and my spouse works. It's a challenge. So, I mean, the way I'm kind of doing my week now is I'm trying to get to 15 to 20 hours of consulting work per week. And then that usually leaves me about 10 to 15 hours. That's, if you total that up, that's not 40. But I also help out more with like our child responsibilities, our drop-offs and pickups for school and stuff like that. But I'm trying to work about 30, 35 hours like in the daytime a week. And then basically like getting enough consulting hours to pay the bills. But the outside of that other 10 to 15 is going to be like writing blog posts, doing conference proposals, overhead of consulting, which there's a lot of, getting on a discovery call with a prospective client, talking through what they need, sending over the info, waiting to hear back, yay or nay kind of thing. So that's all in that 10 to 15 hours range. And I've been doing that for a few months now, but the other stuff I like to do, like with promoting the book, or probably you could call it marketing or promotion types of things, some of that's going to be after hours. You know, I'm going to be like, might be doing that like after the kids are in bed or on the weekends. And it's a little tricky because it could get into family time and stuff like that. So I got to kind of keep everything in balance. And sometimes I'm doing a better job of that than others.
Have you ever thought about doing like video content, like YouTube, like, and then condensing that down into short stuff on the Forbidden platform or YouTube Shorts?
Yeah, definitely with consulting clients, I enjoy creating short Loom videos that'll show how to do something, or I'll show some work that I did and provide it either as just like a summary for people that would rather just consume a video quick than read like a wall of text, which I tend to write, or to actually show, here's how to design this index for this query and why it's helpful, look at the query plan, et cetera. As far as like public content though, I guess I feel like I'm just so inexperienced with that as far as like making a nice looking video. The standard I'd have in my head would be to like have something that is produced a bit, has a title screen and some intro music, and not just me talking on a camera, but I could be overthinking it. I do think like producing some short length content videos would help everything I'm doing though, you know, and like getting it out there. So that is something I'm considering for this year.
Yeah, I was just wondering because that's an area of marketing that I don't see a lot of developers do, but the ones who do it, and they don't even have to do it well, you just have to not do it bad. I feel like that's the thing, because there's just not like a great quantity and quality of like videos out there on stuff like that, especially like in the Ruby and the Rails communities. I have like a high bar for myself as well. It doesn't need to be that high. There's also so many tools now that will just do all that stuff for you. But even just a small thing like, here's how you install LolDBA into your Rails app, and here's how you can use it, and like a 5-minute video or whatever, but you can then cut that up into YouTube Shorts and then distribute those elsewhere. And then those funnel people back to the videos, and then you promote the book and you're consulting and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I hadn't really considered the shorts. And then obviously there's TikTok and Instagram Reels, and besides just YouTube itself. I know that on YouTube, I like to watch conference talks. I don't tend to watch a lot of programming types of things as like some of the popular content creators that are on YouTube personally, but I do consume a lot of conference talks, and then I'll pick up like trainings at different times. Like I was going to mention this person, Hussein Nassar. I don't know if you are familiar with him. Got a link here. Hussein's been someone I met a bit online who also has looked at the book, which I appreciate. And Hussein's got a bunch of really nice videos on Udemy and other platforms for backend engineering and databases content. And he was encouraging me a bit as well to consider like short videos.
Hi there, Julie here. I would like to take a moment to thank GoRails for sponsoring this episode. When I was first starting out, I struggled with finding up-to-date content to help me level up. Then I learned about GoRails. Not only does GoRails provide new screencasts weekly, they also have 2 fantastic instructors that break down complex topics into digestible chunks. On top of that, I really appreciate when they explain the whys behind the subject. One of my favorite walkthroughs is creating your first Ruby gem from scratch. What a great way to learn by stripping down to just the basics. If you care about leveling up as a Ruby engineer, you can't go wrong with GoRails. Check it out at gorails.com. So almost 2 years ago is when I met both of you in person at RailsConf in Portland. And we have another RailsConf coming up. I know, Andrew, you're not able to join us, but I'm calling you Andy now. Andy, you are going to be there and we're going to get to meet. And you are also giving a workshop.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I really hoped to attend RailsConf and then ideally present at it, because I can also then attend, and obviously they cover the costs for presenters, some of the costs, tickets, and there's a hotel and different costs are covered. So as an independent person now without like company budget, that's helpful. But also just to help, I was really excited to be able to deliver this content in some form, whether it was a presentation or a workshop, and then connect with people that are interested in this topic. They might be book buyers, but even if they're not, just helping. I feel like it's become a little bit more of my purpose in my career to help folks out with query optimization, database optimization. It is a challenging topic area, but it's pretty practical and there's a lot of ways to get into it and learn a bit incrementally. So anyway, yes, thank you, Julie. I will be presenting a workshop on the workshop day, kind of sandwiched in the middle of the 2 talk days. Yeah, it's 2 hours, so there'll be like 2 halves to it. And I've been working on outlining what we're going to do in each half. I could get into that.
I was going to say, have you ever given a workshop before?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
The closest I've done is I've certainly attended workshops and participated in them. And so I haven't done one. So I'm looking to, of course, do my first one and then try to do a good job. But I think back to workshops I've been a participant in. And what I'm excited about with this opportunity as on the presenter side is not really as much on the presenting content, like in a lecture style, but really trying to think about what are the ways that I can make this content engaging in a hands-on sense so that people sitting in the audience with their laptops can actually type stuff and do things and learn through experiential learning. So that feels like a new educational challenge, is to like people that are trained in teaching might have a word for this, but basically taking this big list of content that I'd like to cover, but like turning it into small consumable exercises that can be done within the time constraints.
So I actually really like the concept of workshops because I learn best by actually using my hands and getting some hands-on learning. And that's why I'm particularly excited about going to your workshop so that I can get that experience. Can you maybe give us a sneak peek about how that works? I know you were talking about the 2 halves. If you could share that, and assuming we could bring our laptops and you'll have something for us to download.
So yeah, I was thinking for the 2 halves, like the first half would be all about query performance. And so that's going to involve everything from the design of your application's database schema, so which types you're choosing and some of the trade-offs there, to the queries that are running, and then how indexes support those queries. And so we'll try to take a look at it. What I'm thinking to do is to show the whole process kind of end to end, from queries being generated from active record code to really, basically how they're processed on the Postgres side, and then the information that we can get as users of Postgres or as developers from how that query is executed, and then kind of building up from there. So start with a simple example. So the first half will be very focused on query performance. The overarching goal of the workshop is high performance active record apps. So besides query performance itself, like on a particular instance, I thought it would be good in the second half to talk about the benefits of having multiple Postgres instances working together for your application. And this is an area I think where Rails developers typically will have done even less work on. So I think there might be more new stuff here. But what I'm actually going to try to do is within like a 50-minute time slot in the second half, mostly by using Docker. So attendees will have to have Docker ideally installed ahead of time. We're going to send that out with like prerequisites and stuff. But with Docker, we can run multiple instances and then even configure Postgres through its config file to set up replication. So we can have database content going from the first instance to the second one, and then we can configure that with Active Record. In case folks don't know, Active Record supports multiple databases since version 6. And there's a bunch of different things you can do with that, but it all kind of assumes that you have replication set up. And I think for a lot of developers, they may not have never done that before with something like Postgres. So I think it would be instructive to have folks go through that. And fortunately, it's mostly automated through a bunch of shell scripts and running Docker containers, which we'll do. And I think the configuration part, then my goal with that would be to help folks kind of connect the dots with like, how is my Active Record connected to these different databases? And then leveraging that for something like sending all of our read queries to the read replica and having our writes on the primary instance, talking about things like if our primary instance went down, how we might fail over and promote our secondary instance to become a new primary instance. So some of that kind of stuff, like getting a little bit outside of Rails into a little bit infrastructure, DevOps, whatever you want to call it. But I think it would be cool to try to accomplish both of those things in a 2-hour slot. What do you think? Too much?
Do you have to have Docker? I'm just asking because I personally tried to install Docker the other day and everything was destroyed.
That's a good question. Docker is meant to kind of simulate what two different actual like physical servers.
Do you use a GitHub code space?
I've never used GitHub code spaces, but probably because actually we could just run 2 Postgres instances on different ports on the same machine, and that would work too. But it doesn't allow us to separate the like compute load from whatever's happening on the database, which is kind of what I'm trying to show. But it's more just like to demonstrate that idea or to simulate it. It's not actually required though. You could certainly just run a Postgres 16 on the default port and then a second instance of it on a separate port. And you could also have them talk with each other. So the Docker thing though, part of that is it's related to a lot of the content for that section is going to come from a chapter in the book. And that chapter was built with Docker. And for anyone that can attend RailsConf or this workshop and is curious about anything that I've just talked about, the majority of this is actually public on GitHub now in the rideshare repo, which is the app for the book, including there's a Docker directory within that project. And in that directory, I've got different named DB instances. And that helped me kind of keep everything clear in my head as I was working on the chapter 2, where I just had different named databases. So like DB1 and DB2 were like the leader and the follower instances, for example.
Gotcha. I was just curious because Docker, when it works, it's great, but it takes up so much space and it's so like everything about it. Anyway, I was just curious. If you are interested in trying to see if it will work on code spaces, let me know. I'd be happy to give you a hand with that.
Okay.
I'm curious, like, what are some of the main differences between a talk and a workshop? And like, how are you anticipating any challenges that may arise, like lack of internet, for instance?
Yeah, the RailsConf organizers are contacting workshop presenters and kind of collecting some prerequisites. So ideally, we could get a lot of info out to attendees in advance and they could download things that are going to be large in advance, for example, but also possibly getting some content onto USB drives. I haven't used one of those in 10 years, but I guess they're still a thing. I was going to look into that. Yeah, I mean, internet oversaturating a Wi-Fi seems like the biggest likely problem. And I think having some content offline would be nice. So I'll be working on that, I guess. As far as the format difference, though, I think it's going to be coming down to trying to talk less, but provide something that is hands-on oriented and I don't want to just send people off on their own without any background context, but probably show the most simplistic example I can as slide content. And then maybe even ideally distribute the slides to people so they can refer to it in real time, but then give them a challenge that's just a bit beyond what was shown. And then ask people to basically type it out and raise their concerns or where they got stuck and that kind of thing. And then I'm really curious. I don't know how this is going to work, if I'm going to be like walking around to large groups of people or stationed at the front. I'm not exactly sure on the logistics with that, but I would expect there to be stumbling blocks with each of those things. It could be like syntax or like conceptually what we're doing. If we're creating an index with a particular expression in it or a particular filter clause, like why we're doing that kind of thing. So maybe it'd be good to anticipate some of those questions and kind of have a little FAQ going. I also really like the idea about a live place to provide feedback and questions too. I think I'm going to steal that idea, probably just straight up with Google Docs.
Are there any prerequisites that the audience should have before going if you're new to Rails or if you're new to databases in general?
I'm hoping that to target, I guess, someone who has built a database-backed Rails app before, like once, I guess. So someone that they wouldn't necessarily need a lot of experience with Rails, but if they weren't as experienced with Rails, hopefully they built a database-backed web app with something else, another language or framework. And then with Rails, like they probably haven't gone much beyond basic active record querying and that kind of thing. And then what I'd like to do is to try to start from there and show active record code, but like with simple queries to start and try to set some context up front. I'm thinking about trying to balance, I guess, making the content accessible for people that are less experienced, but also getting some things in maybe a bit towards the middle or later sections for the more advanced learners that are maybe they're familiar with the basics of how to write a good index to support queries, but they're like, what else can I do with Postgres specifically? Or what other like pro tips are there? That kind of thing.
I feel like a workshop is long, right? Like it's up to 2 hours. And I feel like you can always start reeling some of the intro folks in. And at some point, they could maybe either passively get information if it's over their head, like what I tend to do, or they can just go to something else. I feel like it's still valuable to give an overview or keeping it simple at first. I found that there are folks who have mentioned, and maybe this is from you, Andrew, that some talks are not advanced enough. And what I mean by that is there's not as many talks that are like advanced content. So if you have that, I feel like it could be a range and folks can just hop in and hop out or something like that.
Before you said that, I was about to come in super hot, but my very calm now take on it is if I go to a workshop and I don't get anything out of it, then I'm upset. I'm pissed. Not pissed because, oh, this person did a bad job, but pissed because of like, oh, I feel like this was a waste of my time because they went over very intro level stuff and it just wasn't what I wanted. So I personally would much rather there be advanced topics just because the people who may get lost in the moment will be able to come back later in their career or continue referring to that and build up those missing skills. But for the people who are there as seniors and their company maybe pays for them to go, and the company's not going to pay for you to go if you're not bringing back anything worthwhile for the company, if that makes kind of sense. So if I don't learn anything at a conference, then it's not really worth Podia's time to send me. So that's why I really much prefer there to be at least some, like you don't have to go all in, but definitely have a little bit, or maybe even just some jumping off points of like, hey, if you're more skilled, here's a bonus trip for you. And you can post some GitHub docs somewhere that were like, hey, here's how you could dive deeper. Here's like how you could go deeper on this, answer these questions, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And to be, it might be relevant to this conversation. I just wanted to share that like in the past, when I've attended RailsConf, I typically didn't attend workshops because I guess I typically was worried about that kind of thing myself. Like I would go and it's kind of fun, but I tend to do a lot of my learning in isolation. And I've also attended workshops outside of RailsConf. It just hasn't worked out for me. Sometimes too, I think it was the logistics of them just being on the first day and just rolling in later. Where interestingly this year, Julia and Andrew, I don't know if you know if this is true, but it seems like it's the first year where they're right in the middle. And
yeah, I really like that too.
I think it might actually bring a lot more people to workshops that may have not otherwise gone.
100%. Especially because they're doing more than just the workshops on that day. Julie, I'm sure, can share more, but we've had also guests on the show who have talked about it, but I think there's a lot going on that day.
And then, it's not conflicting with any talks. So you
that's right.
You either go to the workshop or you go to the hack day or you do the hallway track.
Yo, quick question for you. Do you want higher clarity into production, but don't have the time to become a wizard in observability? Honeybadger Insights is exactly what you need. Forget the old school trio of logs, metrics, and traces. We're talking structured events that don't just sit there. They're your treasure map to solving mysteries in your app. With Honeybadger, sling your logs and events into the mix and voila, you just unlock the power of Honeybadger's new query language, BadgerQL. It's like having a conversation with your data. Ask it anything. Turn mishaps into metrics and showcase your wins on dashboards that even the marketing team will drool over. And guess what? This isn't just for big spenders. Honeybadger's got you covered with a free plan that packs a punch, including error tracking, uptime monitoring, sleek status pages, and more. Oh, and speaking of errors, Honeybadger treats them like VIPs at the club. With Insights and BadgerQL, your errors aren't just problems, they're opportunities. Explore your data in ways you didn't think were possible and get the insights that you deserve. Check out honeybadger.io. That's right, honeybadger.io. You said that you don't do a lot of your learning in collaboration with others. I do my best learning with someone else. So for people like me, like who learn really well like that, who really like to pair, who really like to bounce ideas off people, I feel like that second day is going to be completely different than it's been in the past. And I think a lot of people are going to enjoy it because they kind of previewed this at RubyConf last year and they did it on the first day, which I think was a mistake because there was like an option to basically just skip the whole first day.
Yeah.
I think having in the middle is going to be really great. They did a great job with it. I think there's going to be a lot of people who get a lot out of it this year.
They may have even separated them on price too, which might have been why I didn't go. I'm not trying to bash workshops.
They did.
Yeah. So like I might have just bought the presentations only. So here's another angle on this whole thing too. I don't want to provide content that is non-differentiated. And what I mean by that is I want people to learn new things that they might not have learned elsewhere by attending this workshop. Because from a marketer's perspective, like I want them to think, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. Maybe I should buy his book. I mean, I don't think that's too sleazy to say maybe, but of course, like we're not going to cover an entire book's worth of depth in a 2-hour workshop, but I'd love to like provide some jumping off points. Like with indexing alone, I could fill a 2-hour workshop. So I'm not going to be able to go into all of it, but then maybe there'll be some nice spots to be like, okay, well, we're going to stop here. But if you wanted to have an even more efficient query, there's these other tactics you could use. And here's some of the things to look into, but that's all we have time for within the workshop. Hopefully that comes across the right way, that it's not meant to be a commercial for the book, but it's of course like strongly overlapping with the content. And my goal is for people to come away with things that they've learned, regardless of where they are on the kind of learning level spectrum. If you don't really know what indexes are, you will learn what indexes are. If you don't know how to know whether your indexes are being used by your queries, you will learn that. If you have an index and you're wondering whether it could be efficient because your query is still not very fast, you'll learn that too. We'll see at least one example of that. And attendees will connect what actually are the contributing factors to latency and slow queries. So anyway, so that's going to be the goal. And I'm going to be really cranking on that over the next couple of weeks, trying to come up with those exercises that hit on those different points for different levels of learners too.
In addition to that, what are the key takeaways you hope that the audience leaves your workshop with?
Probably the biggest one is just that a lot of the performance, if they run into performance challenges with their app, for them to think about what portions are attributable to my database operations. And I hope that learners come away with skills to be able to open that up and look under the hood, so to speak. So to know where to look for some of their worst performing queries, to know how to connect that back to their active record code, and then to know what to do to improve the speed of their queries and thus their kind of the scalability for a multi-user web app. So I think there is that. And then I think for folks that are maybe like database or infrastructure curious, I think they'll get exposed to configuring a database server. What are some of the parameters and things that are configurable and what do they mean? What do they do? And how might I use multiple databases together with my app to help scale my work up? So like if I have a e-commerce app or a social network or a B2B app, I can think about like, how might I achieve a lower query execution time across the board? How might I optimize individual queries? How might I design my schema to make it easy for us to cycle out data from customers that we don't have anymore? So anything really related to the database operations is like in the scope of the workshop, but of course can't cover everything. I guess just to wrap up that second half part, we'll specifically focus on what the active record framework does as far as connecting to different databases and how we can take advantage of manual and automatic distribution of read queries to our replica. And I hope learners come away with a better understanding of how that's actually configured so that they could even do it themselves if they wanted to, that sort of thing.
I was looking through your talk outline that you sent us, and as I was scrolling down, it was late and I was kind of tired, but the first thing that popped into my peripheral instantly was indexes. And that sent me on a little ADHD rabbit hole in my brain where I was like, I know what an index is, and I know generally where they're supposed to be used. I don't know when I could be taking advantage of an index or when like I'm solving a problem that I could solve better with an index, if that makes sense. I guess I just don't know when to use them outside of the normal use cases. Basically, Rails doing it for you, I guess.
Yeah. No, it's good for me to hear because I tend to just be brought in when there's already existing problems, and I'll just start diving into possible solutions and that kind of thing. But sometimes it's more important to know, well, where do I look for what my problems are? And with Postgres, anytime an index is used, there'll be a scan of that index that's kind of tallied on internal bookkeeping tables that they call the catalog tables and views. So what we can do is actually look for our queries that are running without and are not using indexes, and they're not being supported by indexes. And we know that generally speaking, those are going to be our higher latency queries. And we'll cover this in the workshop, but we can even track the statistics about those types of queries in aggregate and track back to where they're coming from the app as well. So we can say like pretty conclusively, okay, our dashboard query, we know it's coming from this controller action in the Rails app. This is one of our slowest queries. It's returning a huge number of rows. It's not using indexes, or it could be using more indexes. And that's a great place to start. Some of that visibility data is probably beyond what a lot of Rails developers look at because it's going to be within Postgres itself. But Postgres has all kinds of visibility and observability capabilities, and we'll cover some in the workshop. So yeah, that's a good place to start. And then it's about, okay, well, which indexes do I need to design to support this query? Because generally what we're trying to do with indexes is the query is asking for different bits of data, different columns from different tables. And if we're trying to either put some of it into the index that could just be read from the index alone, or we're trying to make it lower cost for the query planner to get a bit of data from the index that is already either pre-sorted or more selective from all of the rows, like a narrower set. And then it can go and fetch the other things that it needs, but with a much cut down list. So that's usually what we're trying to do with indexes, is just to kind of lessen the cost of our queries.
There's gems out there that for people like me who are like, I could be using more indexes, but I'm not really smart enough to know where. There's gems like LolDBA that exist that are like, try to tell you, oh, well, you probably need them here, 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 here.
Yep.
But I can't look at that list and then be like, yes, this is correct.
Yep. Besides LolDBA, there's a couple of other tools, command line tools, Rails PG Extras, database consistency, and one other one I had jotted down that are mentioned in my book. But if you want to just search for these, they're basically Rails, and these are Postgres, but if you use a different relational database, you could find something similar, or the gems may support multiple types, whether it's MySQL or SQLite or whatever. But yeah, generally, again, we either are looking for query patterns where there's columns referenced for tables, and then by introspecting within the database, we can see, are these columns covered in an index definition or not? And so certain kind of analysis tools can say, okay, well, an index that covers this particular field would support this one or more set of queries, and thus it would be valuable to add. So it's definitely like a tooling thing. Besides that, then we can also on an individual query level, we can get and we'll cover this in the first part of the workshop, take the SQL query text for an individual query, use explain, and just see exactly what it's doing, and it will show us whether it's using an index or not. And then as we add indexes, or we add an index that we want to help the execution of that query, we can then again run a new plan and confirm that it's being used and that it's lowering the cost of the query. Sometimes folks talk about it as macro optimization or micro, where you're either trying to come up with a general purpose set of indexes that will support a lot of your queries. Your application might have thousands of different combinations of queries, like filtering this, transforming that sort of thing. And then you might have a couple of very performance sensitive areas where you want a specialized index. So that might be more of a by hand kind of thing, where you have a multi-column, partial, bunch of different tactics that we'll get into in the workshop.
I'm going to leave you with one final question, because while you were talking, it struck back a memory of something that I highlighted in the book. And it was that Postgres doesn't allow you to control the plan that's selected.
Yep.
Why though?
The idea is that, and this is true of all relational databases, but the idea is that they have this declarative paradigm where you send it the query text, and then the planner, or the optimizer, it's sometimes called, it chooses how to get the data that you need per the query. And it's making a runtime decision amongst different alternative plans, comparing the costs amongst the plan choices, and then choosing the lowest cost plan. And why can't you just fix that yourself? Well, there's kind of a mechanism. The book covers, there's an extension to Postgres called PG Hint Plan that you can use to get some degree of control over the plan. There's also capability on AWS that lets you fix make a plan sticky. Like I want to use this plan going forward sort of thing. The general pushback on that though is that your data characteristics will change over time. Like you might have columns that allow null and like 90% of them are null. And then you make some change later and suddenly 90% of them have values in them and only 10% of the rows are null. And if you had set a plan, for example, that kind of depended on selecting values amongst a list that was mostly null, then you might suddenly have a non-performant plan, right? Because now you're reading all these rows kind of unnecessarily to then filter them out. So the idea of the declarative paradigm is that Planner is continually collecting stats about your data. You can add indexes to influence what the query plan is. You can control the SQL that you send it. So you might add more conditions or that kind of thing. But there is that intentional separation of the planner is going to choose the lowest cost plan. And that way, as your application and database usage evolves, the plan will change too. And hopefully it's in a good direction, making your queries faster.
Well, I think we're going to wrap this up. Tell people where to find you online. Tell people about the book and where they can buy it. And then tell people about conferences and where you'll be.
Yeah. So online, I'm on Twitter and do most of my kind of social networking there. And then I blog at andyatkinson.com. And on my website, I've got links to the book and some of my conference plans. So I'll be at PG Day Chicago, which is actually next week from when we're recording this, which is going to be a one-day Postgres conference. And if you're at all curious about Postgres conferences, the PG Day ones, I just wanted a quick shout out those. Those are nice because they're just these one-day events and you can learn a ton in a day. So they've been really good, the ones I've attended. So I'm excited to be presenting there. And to that audience, I can kind of bring the application developer perspective more. So it's kind of fun. And then I'll also be at RailsConf, as we discussed. And then I can sort of do the opposite and bring more of the database administrator, operator perspective to the developer audience.
I think thinking about the database is important. It's something that I enjoy doing it a lot more after we have our discussions, whether it's here or on Twitter or wherever, or while reading your book, for instance. So Nate Hopkins told me a long time ago that it didn't really matter to him if we made mistakes in the controllers or in the views, or if there was bugs necessarily in the app, because he knew they would always be fixable. Because at the end of the day, the underlying data structure was so solid that he wasn't worried. And I didn't understand at the time, but I do now. And as I've gotten more into my career, I'm like, this is something I want to be focusing on more. I feel like a lot of people probably in my position with my level of experience are probably thinking the same thing or thinking the same thing about a different area of the stack, but a database is important.
Yeah, let me just throw two really quick things I think that are also related to that. I think that there's two things that came to mind right away for me. General skills that are just good, whether it's databases or you're actually more front-end oriented. One is thinking about a bit about the restrictions of what you're actually asking for, in this case from the database, but on the front end, if you're rendering a whole bunch of elements, are we rendering 1,000? Do we need 1,000? Do we just need 10? Or do we need fewer fields? And then also just the idea of introspection. Sometimes it's called observability or visibility into the operations, whether again, that's your database or just how the browser processes the HTML that you're sending. I think that's a good general engineering skill. And hopefully for folks that maybe, whether that's the workshop or the book, like hopefully there's some other general things to take with them. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity again. Always fun to catch up with you and Julie, and looking forward to seeing you both at future events.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. We will catch you all next week. Same time, same great place. Bye.